Hey guys, my name is Mark. I'm going to be talking about the Stanford prison experiment today. The Stanford prison experiment was conducted by psychologist Philip Zimbardo in 1971 at Stanford University. This study became extremely influential in the field of social psychology because it explored how powerful social situations and assigned roles can influence human behavior. And the main goal of the experiment was to investigate how ordinary people respond when they are placed in positions of authority or submission. Zimbardo wanted to understand whether abusive behavior in prisons is caused by the personalities of prison guards or whether the prison environment itself encourages that behavior. In other words, he wanted to answer a very important question, and that is if people become cruel because of who they are or because of the situation they are placed in. And the main purpose of the study was to examine how individuals react when they are given social roles within a system that has a clear power hierarchy. The research question asked whether college students would begin to display cruel or submissive behavior simply because they were assigned the roles of prison guards or prisoners. The Zimbardo believed that situational pressures could overpower a person's morals and over personality, and his theory suggested that people might behave in ways they normally would not if the environment encourages those behaviors. This idea is based on the concept that situations and social expectations can strongly influence human behavior, sometimes even more than personality traits. To fully understand this study, it is important to look at the social and cultural context during the time it was conducted. The Stanford Prison Experiment took place during a period in American history when many people were questioning authority and institutional power. Events like the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement caused widespread debate about whether governments and institutions were abusing their power. There were also increasing concerns about prison conditions and reports of prisoner abuse in the United States. Another important influence on Zimbardo's work was the research of psychologist Stanley Milgram, who conducted the Milgram obedience experiment. Milgram's study showed that ordinary people were willing to administer what they believe are dangerous electric shocks to another person simply because an authority figure told them to do so. And Zimbardo wanted to expand on this idea by studying what happens when people themselves are given positions of authority. The Stanford prison experiment was designed as a simulated prison environment, and researchers transformed the basement of the Stanford Psychology Building into a mock prison. The facility included prison cells, barred doors, a solitary confinement area, and surveillance cameras to observe participants. And 24 male college students were recruited through newspaper advertisements and were paid to participate in the study. But before being accepted, the participants were carefully screened through interviews and psychological testing to make sure they were mentally healthy and emotionally stable. This step was important because it meant that any extreme behaviors observed during the experiment would most likely be caused by the situation rather than personality differences. The participants were randomly assigned to one of two roles, those two roles being prison guards or prisoners. The random assignment ensured that both groups were similar at the start of the experiment, and to make the simulation as realistic as possible, the researchers created a detailed prison experience for the participants. Students assigned to be prisoners were unexpectedly arrested at their own homes by real police officers who cooperated with the experiment, and they were handcuffed, searched, and then transported to the mock prison. And once they arrived, they were fingerprinted, photographed, and given prison uniforms. They were also assigned ID numbers and were referred to only by those numbers instead of their own names. This was done to create a sense of dehumanization and loss of identity. And the guards were given uniforms, sunglasses, and wooden batons to symbolize authority. However, the guards were not given actual instructions or specific instructions about how to treat the prisoners, so they were simply told to just maintain order within the prison. And the study was originally planned to last for 2 weeks. However, it was stopped after only 6 days because of the extreme behaviors that developed between the guards and the prisoners. During the experiment, researchers continuously observed the participants, and several types of data were collected, including video recordings of interactions between guards and prisoners, audio recordings of conversations, daily logs documenting events inside the prison, and self-reports from participants describing their emotional experiences. And most of the data collected in the study was qualitative, meaning researchers focused on analyzing behavior patterns, emotional responses, and interactions rather than relying heavily on numerical measurements. This allowed them to closely observe how individuals reacted to authority confinement, and social expectations. The results of the Stanford prison experiment were dramatic and pretty unexpected. Within a very short period of time, the guards began to display increasingly authoritarian and abusive behavior toward the prisoners, and some guards became extremely strict and enforced harsh punishments for minor rule violations. And in some cases, guards forced prisoners to perform physical exercises such as push ups as punishment. Others used verbal insults and intimidation to assert their power. Meanwhile, the prisoners began showing signs of emotional distress and psychological breakdown. While many prisoners became submissive and passive, they accepted the authority of the guards even when they were treated unfairly. Some of the prisoners experienced things like anxiety and showed symptoms of depression, and several participants experienced such emotional stress that they had to be removed from the study early. And by the end of the experiment, many participants had fully internalized their roles, and guards identified strongly with their authority while prisoners accepted their powerless position. These results supported Zimbardo's hypothesis that situational forces and social roles can strongly influence human behavior. And the experiment demonstrated that even psychologically healthy individuals can engage in harmful behavior when placed in environments that encourage power and control. The Stanford prison experiment had major implications for understanding how authority and social roles influence behavior. One important conclusion from the study is that environments and institutional systems can shape how people behave. And when individuals are placed in positions of authority without proper oversight or accountability, there is a risk that power may be abused. And these findings have been used to analyze real world situations involving institutional authority. And for example, psychologists reference the experiment when examining the Abu Ghraib prison abuse scandal, where U.S. soldiers abused prisoners in Iraq. And the study suggested that certain institutional environments can encourage harmful behavior if there are no checks on authority. Um, Although the Stanford prison experiment is widely known, it has also received significant criticism. And one major concern is that Zimbardo himself became too involved in the experiment and acted as his own prison superintendent, which meant he was part of the simulated authority structure rather than an observer. And this may have influenced how participants behaved during the study. And another criticism involves demand characteristics, which means some researchers believe that participants may have behaved in ways they thought were expected of them. For example, guards might have exaggerated their aggressive behavior because they believed that was how prison guards were supposed to act. Additionally, the sample size was small and consisted entirely of male college students, which limits the ability to generalize the results to larger populations. And some of the Stanford prison experiment also raised. Oh wait, no, sorry. I, yeah, okay, sorry. The Stanford prison experiment also raised serious ethical concerns. Participants experienced significant emotional distress and psychological harm during the study. At the time, research ethics guidelines were not as strict as they are today, and participants were not fully aware of the potential risks involved in the experiment. And modern research standards require studies involving human participants to be reviewed by the IRB, which is Institutional Review Board. And these committees ensure that participants are protected and that researchers follow ethical principles such as respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. The ethical issues raised by this experiment helped lead to stronger protections for research participants. And a personal reflection. The Stanford Prison experiment remains. I mean, it remains one of the most influential studies in psychology because it demonstrates how powerful social situations can influence behavior. And the study shows that even ordinary individuals may act in harmful ways when they're placed in environments that encourage authority and power. It also highlights the importance of ethical responsibility in psychological research because it understands the impact of social roles and authority, which can help us better recognize situations where power might be abused and encourage systems that promote accountability and fairness. Overall, this experiment provides valuable insight into how institutional structures and social expectations can shape human behavior. And that is my presentation.